Welcome, everybody, into an all-new episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Thank you so much for joining me as I take my weekly look at everything going on in the world of combat sports. So much to talk about, so much action from last weekend. We had 3 different fight cards in MMA and the BKFC for us to break down some of those fights. Lots of great action all around, all day long. It started early with the PFL overseas in Dubai, close out late with the BKFC and the UFC, finishing things up here in the US. We'll break down all that, including the BKFC Knucklemania 6 card down there in Philadelphia, the annual huge card that they put on together for the last 6 years. Second year in a row was down in Philly. Lots of great fights to talk about. Titles change hands. New things are emerging, new beefs. Lots of fights, not just in the ring, but also in the crowd. Lots of things going on. I was there for all of it. I'll break down and tell you what I saw. We'll also talk about the PFL Road to Dubai series, where we had another Nurmagomedov title fight. This time he defends against Alfie Davis out there in the Middle East. We'll talk about his defense. We'll talk about some of the other fights, a new champion that is no longer champion already in the PFL. Some crazy things going on there in Dubai. We'll hit on that as well. First card of 2026 for the PFL. And we'll also recap the top fights for UFC Fight Night out there in Las Vegas at the Meta Apex between Bautista and Oliveira. Some other things that shook out. Some guys that are no longer with the organization as well after that. So we'll talk about all that going on in the world of combat sports, as well as some other different news and notes that we have seen come across the wire this past week. Make sure to follow the show on social media. Follow us on X at Fighting Lines, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Fighting Lines Pod. We put up some short videos of the show every week. We'll update some things as they come out later on. If we tape early and there's some betting lines that change, we do that like we did last week. Many things going on our social medias. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Comment, share with friends, share with people. Just get it out there for more people to come and hang out with us here on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. But let's get right into things. Talk about Knucklemania 6. Well, last weekend, I was in the house down in Philadelphia, made the trip down south there to go watch Knucklemania 6 for the BKFC. The second year in a row they have held this huge event for them every year down there in the city of brotherly love where they are located. And it was a typical Philly fight night because you had almost as many fights in the stands as you did in the ring. Even between not just fans, but there was a battle between fighters, as you had a lot of video come out this week of Eddie Alvarez's family and crew getting into it with Mike Perry and kind of jumping him. You also had a video where a cop was fighting a guy in the concourse and basically threw the taser at his head, broke the taser over this guy. That's how crazy it is. They're even fighting the cops in Philly. But that's a typical fight night in Philadelphia. You get over 18,000 people in attendance together, watching some fights, giving them some alcohol. Fists are going to fly, not just inside the ring. That's just the way it is. It's the way it is a lot of places, but especially in Philadelphia. So we had a lot of that going on throughout the night. 18,217 in attendance for this. They broke their own record that they set last year for a live fight in Philadelphia. They had over 3 million streams, 2 million before they even got to the main event, as they were all over the place, whether it was FanDuel, YouTube, their own socials, their own channels all over the place, The Zone, giving it for free. So many different ways you could have watched this FUBU. They were everywhere, giving it out to the fans, trying to suck them in with Knucklemania 6. And it looked like it worked because you got a lot of people involved watching those fights. Let's break down the card first, starting with the main event. And heavyweight title was on the line. Big Ben Rothwell putting that title up for the first time since he won it last year's Knucklemania. The 44-year-old heavyweight champion coming in there with 4-0 record in the BKFC before this. All those ending really quickly. Just coming in steamrolling guys, coming off that win over Mick Terrell last year in Philadelphia to win that title in under 40 seconds. Putting it up against Andrei Arlovski, the Pitbull, the legend in MMA. Of course, as a former UFC champion. First BKFC fight for him was a little bit slow. 4th round TKO finish for him. But we'll see if he was going to fight different in this one. I was rolling with Rothwell, the way they fought. I know they had history. I knew that, Arlovski had beaten him twice in MMA, but BKFC is different for a lot of these fighters. And the way Rothwell had fought in this, it seemed like this was, his groove. This was his home. This was the best place for him. And that his bully style was going to make him a tough opponent for Arlovski. It didn't. He loses this fight. Arlovski stops Ben Rothwell in the 3rd round by TKO, doctor stoppage, 1 minute and 14 seconds in. And he was pummeling him this whole fight. Now, as I said, when we saw these guys fight in the BKFC before, Ben Rothwell was a big bully, just going after guys, being bigger, getting in front of them, throwing heavy hands. And Arlovski's first fight, he was feeling things out. He was cautious, trying to get used to this. It was completely different in this fight, whether it was because of the history and Arlovski knew he had, an in on Rothwell's head or what. I don't know, but he just came right at him. The pit bull acted like the pit bull. He came straight at him. He was beating him up, landing great shots inside. He just had good, clean shots down the middle in the pocket against Big Ben, coming forward the whole time. Now, Rothwell was throwing some big haymakers, was trying to throw over the top, land on Arlovski, finish him with those punches. It seemed like every punch he threw was trying to finish him. But the problem was Arlovski was just so much faster. Even though he's the older fighter, he was so much quicker, got out of the way, avoided the big shots that Rothwell was trying to hit him with, and just kept picking him apart for 3 rounds. In both the first and second rounds, Rothwell got backed up with some shots from Arlovski. Looked like he was in trouble, looked like it could be over then. If he just landed a couple more shots, he's able to survive both those. But then, as we said, in the third, Rothwell was already cut going into that. They stopped him before that round, had the doctor check it out. They let him continue. It was pretty bad bleeding on the forehead, but they continue fighting, and it's just the same thing. Arlovski coming forward, Arlovski onslaughting, landing big shots on the champion to the point that minute and 14 seconds in, they stop it, have the doctor check it, and almost immediately he waves it off. The bleeding and the nasty cuts from the top of the head were just too much for them to let him continue, and honestly, they probably saved him because, sure, he's got that power, and he can just knock you out with one punch in a lot of instances, but it wasn't looking like he was going to land that all night. He was getting more tired, even in just 3 rounds. The beating he was taking from Arlovski, I think would have continued and kept going on, and could have did a lot more damage if they didn't stop it there. So good on the doctor and the ref for stopping it and ending it, because Arlovski was clearly the better fighter in this fight, and he is now the BKFC heavyweight champion at 47 years old. He gave a very inspiring speech in the ring talking about, surviving cancer 3 different times in his life, which I'm sure if we go back and look at the years and the records probably could coincide with some of the loss streaks that he had in his MMA career. Still was fighting through all that, taking chemotherapy, doing different things to fight this disease, and give a message to all the fans out there who have that, saying, don't give up, keep fighting, never give up. And, Valvano-esque as far as you can in Belarusian broken English, but still, it was great to see him do what he did and now become the champion. He spoke in the post-fight about, that he probably is in Ben Rothwell's head, that he knew he was because of their previous fights, and talked about the Arlovski method that he's rolling out, a different way of, dealing with your health and fighting cancer from all of his experience. Now, even though he's 47, it seems like he has been fighting forever. Arlovski says he still has, at least a couple more fights, maybe a few more years left in him. So we'll see what is next for him as the new heavyweight champion of the BKFC. Does he kind of sit on the shelf to that baddest man tournament that the BKFC is trying to throw out there for big money? Or does he defend that title against a guy who has been waiting forever in Leonardo Perdomo, that has, for some reason, not gotten this shot against Rothwell over the last year before Arlovski did? I mean, this guy's unbeaten, 10-0, has only had 1 fight go outside of the first round. There's obviously the next challenger, but does he get a shot at Arlovski before this tournament starts and those both guys get in the mix against other people? We'll see. But Andrei Arlovski, the new champion of the heavyweight division in the bare knuckle fighting championships. Then before that, we had a catchweight, cruiserweight, pound-for-pound best fight between Lorenzo the Juggernaut Hunt and the redneck Dave Mundell. Hunt was supposed to fight Yoel Romero, of course, and Romero pulled out. So Hunt, the 43-year-old light heavyweight champion who just got that title back after taking it off Josh Dyer, the former double champion, former pound-for-pound best in the BKFC, was going against Dave Mundell, the 34-year-old middleweight champion who was #1 in the pound-for-pound rankings on an 8-fight win streak, just dominating people. And this is going to be a tough fight. Both these guys are great fighters. I thought the Juggernaut held the edge because of the size difference, that he is used to fighting bigger. And of course, their sizes, their weight was, pretty similar on fight night. And on the weigh-in day before, it would have been put on the site as a heavyweight fight, but they fought at cruiserweight, both right under 200 pounds there. But it didn't matter. The Juggernaut's used to bigger guys. He's used to fighting those upper, size guys at 205 and above when he fought McTwell at heavyweight. So fighting a guy in Mundell who is tough, who's fast, who's a great technical fighter, but might not have the same power as those big guys, worked out well for the Juggernaut as he gets this victory. I thought he would. I thought that difference would be big, and it ends up being so as the Juggernaut gets a 4th round KO win 29 seconds into the round. I thought he'd win probably in the 2nd or 3rd. He takes a little longer in the 4th, but round 1 was tight. Both these guys were throwing, coming forward, switching back and forth on who was the aggressor, who was landing. Round 2, both guys throwing again, but Hunt landed a 3-punch combination at one point where The first two kind of glance off Mundel's arm and shoulder as he's backing up, but that third one finds a home, catches Mundel and drops him, and that makes it a 10-8 round for the Juggernaut. Then after that, both guys continue to land in the third round, continue to go back and forth, continue to have their moments, but I still thought it was in favor of Lorenzo Hunt and that he was up 30-26 going into that fourth round. So now, of course, Mundel's going to have to try to turn it up a little bit. He's going to have to put the pressure on and try to go for broke because he needs knockdowns and he needs a finish. Well, 15 seconds into that round, Lorenzo Hunt lands a big straight right that drops Mundel. He gets up slowly, but the ref waves it off. Fight is over, and the Juggernaut remains champion because neither belt was up for grabs here, but now is the number one pound-for-pound fighter. And he had a lot to say, of course. When he first dropped, Mundel kind of stood over him, stared at him for a second or two as they started the count. Then he backed off, and then after it was waved off and done, started crawling around the ring right past him, almost knocked him over, acting like a dog there. They get into a shouting match later on because as they're getting ready to read the results of the fight and talk about it to the crowd, Lorenzo starts yelling at the corner for Dave Mundel, and then Mundel takes exception to that. They have to be separated. But in the post-fight, the Juggernaut talked about how he had respect for Mundel, how he liked him, like that he didn't want to have to do this to him, that he hates taking the pound for pound from him because he is such a great fighter. But obviously he has beef with his corner apparently for the way things went, but still has a lot of respect for Dave Mundel. And both these guys are still the top two fighters pound for pound wise in the BKFC. And we'll see if they meet up again in the future. But right now they'll go back to their respective divisions and go from there. Although the Juggernaut did say that, he wants to regain everything he once had. So that could mean going and fighting at cruiserweight for that title. And that could mean, as he talked about, going for that heavyweight title again. He talks about how that's the ultimate honor, being the heavyweight champion of any organization. And he even said that he was happy Arlovsky won because he didn't want to have to go fight Rothwell. He's gonna, but he thinks he does much better against Andrei Arlovsky than he would have against Ben Rothwell. So we'll see if that fight happens soon or down the line, but that seems to be something on the mind of the Juggernaut, who was walked out, of course, by the Juggernaut. We find out later on that it was actually Chiefs running back Kareem Hunt in that costume who walked him in with the belt, but he was walked in with typical flair of having the Juggernaut right out in front of him, holding his belts, no champion unless I say so, and he gets the job done to now take over as the pound-for-pound best in the bare knuckle fighting championships. Now, we talked about earlier how Mike Perry got into it with Eddie Alvarez and his crew. Well, that was the only one who was looking out for Perry. Of course, he is one of the bigger names in the BKFC, and it turns out that the Juggernaut wants a piece of him too. He wants that big money fight, and he said that he's owed that because in 2020, he reached out to Mike Perry when he got cut by the UFC. Said, hey, man, come to the BKFC. I know they'll give you a chance. I know this is a good place to redeem yourself, and, you can be a badass here. So he said he recruited him. Now it's time for him to let him have a shot at that big money fight. Perry didn't seem to be too interested there ringside watching the fight, seemed to be shrugging it off, but we'll see if that ever comes to fruition or if the Juggernaut then goes and fights for some bigger titles. But he is the pound-for-pound best in the BKFC right now. Before those two bests met up, we had a fight that was a feature fight at middleweight between Johnny Cannoli Garbarino and Kane Tomlinson Jr. Of course, Garbarino getting a lot of love from the BKFC and a lot of prop up for him as they try to build him up, especially when they're fighting in Philly. So he got that third from the last slot there. He was coming in there against Tomlinson Jr., who had a big win at Knucklemania 5 in Philly last year. So he's trying to get revenge for the Philly fans and the Philly faithful. Garbarino who was coming in unbeaten, 3-0 in the BKFC, all by KO TKO in Philly. So his home turf, he gets to fight in front of his fans. They were all rooting for him. I thought Garbarino would get a quick finish in this one. I thought he'd get a first-round TKO because Tomlinson had a big feast or famine record so far in his BKFC career. It was either he was going to knock you out or you were going to knock him out. So I thought with some relentless pressure like that was going to walk right into Garbarino's shots. But he didn't because he changed up styles. And it was a very weird fight, very frustrating fight. The fans didn't like it. It was hard to watch at times because both these guys were trying to use head movement to avoid shots from the other, but were doing it in a manner where they were ducking so low that oftentimes they lost their balance and were either knocked down with a push or just body contact or just fell because they couldn't hold their balance. So we had a situation of 4 rounds with these guys just back and forth. Who's on the mat? That's ruled a slip. This guy throws that, but it's not a knockdown. It was just a lot of work for the ref trying to figure out what the hell was going on, and a lot of work for us to all stay watching and locked in on that fight. There were still plenty of knockdowns. I thought Garbarino had a couple credited to him where he had a couple rounds where he was up multiple points, so he was clearly going to win this fight if it went to a judge's decision. But then in the 5th round. He gets a clean knockdown that puts Tomlinson on the mat. And at that point, the ref just had enough. He really didn't even get a chance to get up and make sure he was all right. As he's trying to get up and recover, he's like, you know what? Fight's done. And just like the rest of us, he was sick of watching it. Fight was over. Garbarino wins. He had a lot to say in the post-fight, talking about how he learned a lot of things from this fight, about how guys are going to try to circumvent the rules and use them to their advantage to avoid really fighting him, because that is, a lot of what Tomlinson Jr. did there. The way he was, going down to knees and trying to use it as slips and kind of bush league things that were going on. He said he learned a lot about that in this fight, and also talked about how he asked for higher ranked opponents, name guys, big guys, trying to build his name and trying to build his legacy in the BKFC, but that the BKFC had given him this instead, and he trusts them and respects them and believes in their vision for him. So he's not trying to rush things, but he feels like he's ready for better competition, ready to go fight in different places, and wants to be a champion within a year. So we'll see what is next for Canelo Garbarino here in the BKFC as he continues his rise through the organization and through this division. Before that was a title eliminator fight at lightweight between Ben the Bomber Bonner and Tony Loco Soto, two guys who had fought last summer in Texas, fighting for an interim title there in that lightweight division after it was taken off Franco Tenaglia. Well, this became a title eliminator because the final spot in the tournament for the lightweight division was also taken away from Franco Tenaglia, because now, once again, he is fighting MMA, this time signing with the PFL, going to be on that Spain card for them. Of course, a huge MMA fighter in Spain. A lot of people love to go watch him in those local promotions. Now they get to see it for the first time in a big promotion like the PFL. So with that, ripped out of the finals against Austin Trout for the lightweight title here once again. We'll see if the BKFC just washes their heads in completely, but that gave an opening for Ben Bonner or Tony Soto to get back into this mix. Of course, Bonner lost to Tenaglia by a BS decision over there in Europe. I thought he had clearly won that fight, but the judges gave it to Tenaglia. So now he gets a fight again against Soto, who he beat the first time by unanimous decision. Soto was coming off back-to-back losses to Tenaglia and Ben Bonner, hadn't fought since their fight in June. I said that I thought Bonner was going to win this fight. I liked him by decision, and it was actually decent on the money line because they did have odds for these fights close to it. Minus 128 on the money line was Bonner when FanDuel came out with those lines, and he wins it by decision. I just thought he controlled this fight, from go. Unlike the first fight where he had an early knockdown that really played into the scoring later on, this one never knocked Soto down, but also was never really in trouble. The most excitement, I guess you could say, for Soto throughout this fight was his walkout, where he had some DJ Khaled-esque guy rapping as he's walking down the walkway, about New York and about Soto, where he comes, being from Brooklyn and how badass he is, but wasn't a great song, and it wasn't a great performance once he got in that ring. Bonner was just there to handle business and was just outstriking him from the outside throughout this fight, picking him apart over and over again. I thought Bonner was coming forward early, was setting the pace, putting it on Soto, making him back up. The last 3 rounds, Soto was coming forward. He was trying to turn things around, was trying to get back in the mix, but still could not break that long reach of Bonner, get inside and get those big shots that he likes to do. Instead, he was just picked apart over and over again with sticking and moving. Now, I had a 5 rounds to 0 for Bonner. I thought he clearly won at 50-45, just dominating Soto the whole time. But as with anything, you hand it to the judges and it could get dangerous. I mean, we had 2 of them give it 49-46. So, okay, 4 rounds to 1 for Bonner. Sure. Not exactly how I saw it, but I can be okay with 1 round to Soto. One of them had it 48-47. 3-2? Are you kidding me? Soto never got going in that fight. Bonner was in complete control. That was an absolute terrible decision. The only way it could have been worse is if you had it the other way and it was 48-47 for Soto. Don't know what these judges see sometimes. Throughout that fight, it was either Bonner coming forward and picking Soto apart, or Soto coming forward and Bonner still picking him apart. So it should have been at least 4-1, if not a clean sweep on that card. But still, Ben Bonner gets the win, moves on, and now will fight Austin No Doubt Trout for the lightweight title for the BKFC later this year, in a fight that's to be announced. Now you can actually go back on our social media and see some of the clips that we got from the post-fight press conferences, and one of those was me asking Ben Bonner about this fight, about how did you get even better for this one? Because the first one, he got a knockdown that played out big in the scoring. This one, he didn't get a knockdown and never needed it, that he just dominated Soto throughout and never really let him get going. And you talked about how it was all about his coaches and about his preparation, that the other one was on 8 days' notice, so he didn't have the gas tank he usually does. And his coach came up with a great plan for him, and he just followed it. to a T, and it worked out perfectly. So make sure you go check out our social media for the show, and you can see the different clips we got from the post fight, see some of the pictures of the event, some videos that we had as well. But Ben Bonner talking about how this time he just did what he had to do, got ready with lots of time, followed the plan of the coach, and has an easy fight against Tony Soto to get into those finals. Before that fight, we had a great battle, fight of the night at heavyweight between Pat the Brick Brady and the last barbarian, Bear Hill. Now, Brady was coming in there unbeaten 2-0 in the BKFC, the Philly native, 42 years old, coming off a first-round TKO win over Zach Calmus last January in Philly, going against Hill, the 32-year-old from Alabama, who was unbeaten 2-0 in the BKFC. So both these guys were coming in there with some nice wins in the early part of their career. I thought Brady would get the second-round TKO. He was minus 230 on the money line. He gets the win, but it ends up being a unanimous decision, 50-42, 49-41, 49-43. As you can tell by the wacky scores all over the place, there was a lot of knockdowns, a bunch for Brady. This was a much better fight, actually, than the scores would have you believe, though, because even if you give Brady all 5 rounds, or even 4 out of the 5, Bear Hill still had his moments. He still had some big shots. Both guys landed some huge shots back and forth. I mean, I thought that Bear actually took the first round. I had him in a slight edge there over Brady. He was a little more aggressive, landed some big shots, back Brady up at times. But rounds 2, 3, and 4 went to Brady for sure. He was in almost complete control, except in the 4th round. There were moments when Bear Hill was landing some big rights. You can go see the video online. Just huge shots that he was putting to Brady's chin. I mean, some of these shots that Bear Hill was landing on Brady's jaw were making me hurt all the way in the media section. So I don't know how the man didn't get knocked out or even go to the mat and get knocked down, but he did it. He stood tall, he stood tough, and then he continued to land some good shots on Bear Hill throughout, including in that 5th round. Just some, aggressive, dominating performance by Brady for the most part, and he gets the easy win for him on the judges' scorecards, at least. Not easy actually in the ring, but score-wise, he gets it. And it was such an impressive fight that after the fight, Dave Feldman walked into that ring, and before they even announced who the winner was, said, I was in the back before, and I told these guys, put it all out there, and I'll take care of you. And he said he was doubling both their purses. And they got fight of the night, so they got a bonus on top of it. So these guys definitely got paid much better than they expected to by putting on that incredible performance, but that they did. And Brady was appreciative of that, but talked about how he was turning 42 and how he had a daughter that just turned 1 and had a bunch of young kids. And that the only way it ends up, if he keeps going, keeps taking these fights, is, in a bad situation where he's laid up and laid out, and he doesn't want that. He wants to be able to be a good dad and be there for his kids. So he was hanging him up. That is the end of his career in the BKFC. So walks out on top in probably the fight of his career. Great performance by him, and hopefully he has a wonderful second act here with his family afterwards and continues with his construction business and has a great life other than fighting, because he certainly put it out there for all the fans, certainly put on some great performances for us, and left it out on the line in his last one for sure. We also had a women's bantamweight fight that we had talked about before between Jadma Song Wong and Crystal the Rugged Beauty Pittman. I was kind of excited for this one. These are 2 women who put it out there, not just their beautiful looks, but they throw out, some great fights. They put on some hard punches. They're not afraid to mix it up, except in Jadma Song Wong's last fight where she fought the Misfit, and she was kind of just avoiding getting hit most of the time. Never really fought, never really tried to take the championship. Well, that ends up how this fight goes, but the opposite way. Now is JMW chasing Crystal Pittman this whole fight, and Pittman just on her bike, circling, avoiding shots, but never really throwing. It never looked like she was trying to win this fight. It looked like she was just trying to not get hit and not lose badly. I thought that Wong would win this probably even quicker than back when they fought in 2021, which was a 3rd round TKO, but it goes to decision, and it ends up being 50-45 for Jadma Song Wong, and deservedly so, because she was trying to fight. She was coming forward. Crystal Pittman just wasn't willing to engage. Bad fight. Nobody liked watching that one, despite having beautiful women in the... No one liked watching that one. There was a lot of boos going on in the crowd. Last one we'll talk about before we get out of here in depth is the middleweight battle between Mike the Marine Richmond and Joe the Hitman Elmore. Both these guys later in their career, of course. Richmond, the former light heavyweight champion, coming in for his first fight since he lost that title to Josh Dyer by 4th round in May of last year. Elmore on a 4-fight losing streak, but the guy was always exciting, always brings it. And he was talking in the pre-fight presser about how he felt like 2 of his fights that he was on in that losing streak should have gone his way, but the judges didn't give it to him. Well, I thought that Richmond was going to win. I had him by 3rd round TKO. He beats Joe Elmore by majority decision, 48-46, 49-45, and then one judge had it 47-47. It was a tough battle between these two guys. I expected it to be. I thought Richmond would take the edge and use that precision striking to get a finish. He does not, but he uses that to get the win here. First round was tight. Richmond was even sent stumbling 30 seconds in with a good shot by Elmore, but never went down, got back up, kept attacking. I thought still kind of took the round there, having more big strikes than just the one that Elmore hit him with. In the second round, Richmond stumbled Elmore, some good shots early on in that round, but then later on, finally puts him to the mat where he gets a good uppercut to the body that drops him with 30 seconds left in the round. So that one's 10-8 Richmond. Elmore backed up Richmond again with an overhand right in the third. I thought he took that round as well, but then Elmore was looking like he was getting tired in the fourth. He looked like he gassed out with some of the big shots he threw in the first 2 and 3 rounds. And Richmond was starting to land some good stiff jabs, kept coming forward, kept attacking, and putting his opponent on the back foot. He was controlling much of the fifth as well before Elmore started to come alive at the end to try to maybe steal the round. I don't think he did. I thought that it was clearly Mike Richmond winning, 4 out of the 5 rounds. I had it 49-45 on my scorecard. Maybe it could have been 48-46 if you give Elmore one more of those rounds. Obviously, he takes the third round, but I thought that Richmond didn't have to take all the other ones, including the knockdown. But either way, he does get the win. Richmond gets the victory. I don't know how you possibly had it 47-47. Again, you give it to the judges and get some wacky stuff, especially ones who don't see this often, don't know what they're really looking at overall. But 47-47 was not even close to what it should have been. At worst, 48-46. I thought it should have been 49-45. But Richmond still gets the victory anyway. Majority decision versus unanimous. Doesn't matter. He still gets the win. Some other quick thoughts on the other fights we saw on this card. You had Charles Felony Bennett, a guy who was walking in and 1-25 in his last 26 fights in his late 40s. Hadn't won in a long, long, long time. Kept fighting and comes in here and gets a win over Pat Sullivan with a second round TKO. Also walked in like some racist internet meme, making fun of some crazy white dude. Definitely in character. We'll see what's next for him if they hang him around with the BKFC or if he just came in here and upset their plans to get Pat Sullivan back on the right track. You also had Cody Russell get a second round TKO over Harrison Aiken. A great fight for him and a better message that he gave after the fight. And you saw the clip from post-fight that we had when I asked him about what he said in the ring, talking about mental health and about how important it is to deal with that, talking about how him and Aiken were both going to donate their purses to mental health organizations. They didn't get to announce it before the fight, but he talked about it afterwards. And I asked him about how important it was for guys like him, for fighters, guys who are supposed to be invincible and not show any cracks in their armor, to take off that mask and show how important mental health treatment is. And he talked about that a little bit. If you want to go check that out on our social medias. You also had Lex Ludlow beat Zach Callis by unanimous decision, 30-26 on all 3 judges' scorecards. This was a 3-round fight. There were a couple of those. It was weird, but they had them, but this was one of them. And Ludlow just dominated Callis the whole time. He was coming forward. He was landing big shots on Callis. Looked like he was going to stop in the first 30 seconds of the fight. Somehow Zach survives. Looked like he was trying to tire him out, maybe wait for him to, empty the gas tank with some of those big shots early on and then take over in the later rounds. The problem was there were no later rounds. There were only 3 rounds. And it was too late for him to turn it on when there is no 4th and 5th. So Lex Ludlow gets the clear victory there. You also had Zechariah Montanez beat Brandon Meyer by second round KO, and Prince Naseem beat Brett Schofelt by unanimous decision, 30-25 on all 3 judges' scorecards, because that was also another 3-round fight. Make good on him getting the golden ticket to make it to Knucklemania at the Philadelphia tryout. And Joshua Oxendine beats Travis Thompson by unanimous decision, 30-27 on all 3 judges' scorecards. You watch Travis Thompson, the animal, is one of those guys that's always exciting when you watch him fight, but he's had a lot of losses lately, and I worry about his health going forward. I was telling that to some of the guys I was talking to in the media area, some of the other podcasters and hosts that were hanging out there. I mean, most times in the BKFC, a guy doesn't need that many shots because you have guys getting cut open. You have the doctor stoppages a lot more. You get the clear knockouts, quicker because of the no padding of the gloves. But the animal Thompson is a badass, and he can eat a lot of shots, but he always eats a lot of shots. So you have to wonder how much he has left, getting punched over and over and over again. He's a badass, but you got to worry about him in the future for sure. Also, during this fight card, you had Dave Feldman make some announcements, including that they're going to start a new thing called Bare Knuckle Fight Club that's going to start in Philadelphia in April. It's going to be an 8-round tournament, 1-round fights each. Winner moves on and gets a BKFC contract. going to be very interesting. It's going to be 2 different weight divisions. It's going to be a bunch of guys and just keep fighting all night to see if you can win that kind of tournament style you saw, years ago with some of these other MMA organizations, some old boxing organizations. It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. They're going to start that at the beginning of April in Philadelphia. They also talked again about the BKFC that's going to be happening early next year, the cruise where they're going to take you into the Bahamas and then have a fight right on the dock somewhere. That's going to be crazy. Also, some new destinations added for some fight cards coming up. They're going to have fights in Hawaii in April, Denver, and Australia, back to back to back 3 weeks there. It's going to be the first week of April is that BKFC Fight Club. And then the next week, they're in Hawaii. The week after that, in Denver. The week after that, in Australia. So they have a stacked lineup of fights coming up in April for sure. They have a couple cards in March as well. We just found out there's going to be a title on the line March 20th down in Hollywood, Florida. King Kai Stewart returns to defend his title. So a lot of great action coming up in the next couple months for the BKFC. Well, the BKFC was the only one with the title on the line last weekend in their cards. You also had one up for grabs with the PFL Road to Dubai, where Usman Nurmagomedov, the lightweight champion, once again puts his belt on the line as he took on the Axeman Alfie Davis. Davis, the 33-year-old from England, was coming in off the 2025 PFL lightweight tournament. He was the winner of that one, 6-1-1 in Bellator, 3-1 in the PFL before this fight, going against Nurmagomedov, 27-year-old from Dagestan, the PFL lightweight champion. Of course, unbeaten, 20-0 in his career, won no contest. Coming off defeating Hughes for the second time. A little bit shaky on that judging, but still was a huge favorite in this one against Alfie Davis, as he always is, minus 1,800. I liked him to win the fight. I thought he'd win it by decision. We don't get that far, as Nurmagomedov beats Davis by technical submission in the third round, 4 minutes and 41 seconds into that round with a kind of modified triangle choke. Very interesting, the submission he pulled off there. Early on, it was Nurmagomedov chasing Davis, picking him apart for the outside for the first 2 rounds, basically. Was just doing whatever he wanted, coming forward, landing on the challenger, putting him on his back foot. Davis had a moment there where he threw one of those big, of course, patented axe kicks, but Nurmagomedov looked like he was in the Matrix, ducking under that thing, and then as well, big fist that came afterwards. Doesn't land either of those on the champion, so he continues to hold both those 2 rounds off his great striking and is up 2-0 going into that third round. In that third round, Nurmagomedov changes up. Early takedown, starts to work on him from the top throughout the round. With about 2 minutes left, they eventually get stood up. Took him down again with 40 seconds left in the round. So really not much time to do anything, right? Wrong. Right away, tries to take the back off the takedown. Now Alfie Davis fights it, kind of throws his back on the cage and is on his side trying to keep him off his back. Well, what does the champion do? He improvises, throws a triangle choke from the side, and then kind of transitions to the back a little bit with that triangle choke still locked in there, almost one-handed, chokes out Alfie Davis with a triangle choke because Davis didn't give it up, didn't tap out, but in a matter of 15 seconds, he went from defending the back to lights out, unconscious, fight over, and Nurmagomedov defends his title once again and remains the lightweight champion for the PFL and their biggest draw, their biggest name, as he continues to dominate for this organization. How much longer will he do that, though? Because he let slip before this fight that he only had 2 fights left. So now after this fight, he has 1 fight left on his deal. And we also find out that it's not contingent on just that fight. It can't be like the PFL just drags us out, because if they don't give him another fight before the end of 2026, he can also become a free agent. So either you fight him again and he's a free agent by summertime, or you hold off and he's a free agent by the end of the year. But right now, he is going to be a big name that is up for grabs for anybody that wants to sign a big-time lightweight and that wants that Nurmagomedov name. And of course, the UFC is going to be involved with that. They're going to be, have their hands in there trying to steal him away and go put him with his brother, who is tearing things up in that organization as well. Will the PFL be able to match? Can they afford not to match? I mean, this is a guy who is basically the face of this organization, especially of their fights in Dubai. Now they're expanding. They're doing the Spain fight with Castelo Van Steenis, who's from there. They're having fights in Pittsburgh, but they have a huge presence in Dubai, that Coca-Cola Arena. And of course, having Nurmagomedov on that card is a huge part of that. I don't think they can afford to lose him. It's just a matter of if he wants to stay. What kind of check can they write for him? And is it about the check or is it about the legacy? He's young enough to still be able to take a big money deal from them and then go fight for UFC gold later on and cement the legacy then. But does he want to do that? Who knows? Because his cousin quit a lot earlier than that. only a couple of years from where his cousin decided to hang it up. And we'll talk about one of his teammates doing the same thing coming up next. But this is a situation where this guy might hang it up early. It's about glory. It's about legacy. It's not necessarily about the money for these guys, surprisingly enough. So it might not be about the PFL throwing a ton of money at him. It might be about legacy, about being a UFC champion, especially now that his teammate Islam Makhachev is no longer in that lightweight division. The path is clear for him to go battle some of these top guys and try to win a belt without fighting one of his own. His brother's lower than lightweight. Makhachev is above lightweight. So the path is clear to sign up, try to rip through these guys and try to win that title and cement his legacy. Plus, who is there for him to fight right now in that division? Just beat Alfie Davis, who was number one in those rankings. Ghazi Rabadanov, his last fight was a loss to Alfie Davis. So can you give him a title shot? Probably not. Oh, and by the way, he's also his teammate. So you're not going to get him to fight him. While you've had that happen in American MMA, some of these guys at ATT or some of these other big gyms have fought each other, or, moved gyms and then fought. You're supposed to have that with Kayla Harrison and, of course, Salinas, Amanda Nunez, who trained together for a long time. You're not going to get that from these Dagestanis. They're family, whether they are literally family or not. So he will not fight Rabadanov. Number 4 is Paul Hughes. You already beat him twice. You're not going to put that up there right now, especially with Hughes not having fought since. So really the only one that you have there for him to fight is Archie Colgan, who's also unbeaten at 13-0, 8-0 in Bellator, 2-0 in the PFL. Lots of decisions lately, so it's not the most exciting fight probably. But after that, it's what you got. So you got one fight left in the deal. You put him against Archie Colgan. He beats him, defends the belt again. Who else is there? Teammates or guys he's already beat. Does that excite you and make you want to take the big check and stick around? Or does that say, you got nothing else for me, time to move on? So that's going to be a big thing for the PFL, I think. Not only do they need to re-sign him and give him the bag to keep him, but they got to build up that division with some other names. They got to make some other signings, steal some other fighters, so you have fresh blood in there for this guy to try to go through and cement his legacy as the best lightweight in the PFL and maybe one of the best lightweight out there right now. And talking about one of his teammates, you had an inaugural welterweight title fight before this one between Ramazan Kuramagomedov and Shamil Musayev. Musayev, the 32-year-old, won the 2024 PFL welterweight tournament. Hadn't fought since November 24 after beating Umalatov. Kuramagomedov, the 29-year-old, is former welterweight champion of Bellator, 13-0 in MMA, 3-0 in Bellator, now fighting for the PFL title. That was his first fight since beating Jason Jackson in June of 2024. I was going with Musayev with this one. I thought that, from what I'd seen from him recently, the guy was dangerous. He was badass. And I thought he was going to win this fight. He was a big favorite at minus 430. I thought he'd get the KO TKO like he does against everyone. He Instead, Kuramagomedov beats Musayev by unanimous decision, 48-46 on all 3 judges' scorecards. It was a tight fight. If you look at that math, that's 3 rounds to 2, except for the fact that Musayev lost a point there. Should have been 48-47, but he made a big mistake that cost him. Didn't cost him the fight because he still would have lost on all 3 judges' scorecards. Just would have been a little closer. The first 3 rounds, Kuramagomedov was backing Musayev down, was picking him apart from the outside. Was very different than we've seen anyone fight against Musayev. He was able to, make him fight the way he wanted to, was able to make him almost timid and not really throwing. Things changed in the last 2 rounds. Musayev took those over. Now that was the Musayev that we knew, that we've seen a lot of before. Threw some big shots, but at one point, Kuramagomedov in the 4th round is on the ground, on a knee. Musayev throws a nasty knee into him. Point taken away. Because it wasn't just, accidental. It was a big shot. It could have changed the fight. In fact, it might have, almost, because Kuramagomedov apparently had an arm injury after that fight that might have happened off of that knee. So now point is taken away, and not that it really changed things because Musayev still was going to need a finish in the 5th round in order to win this because he was down by 3 rounds. So in the 5th round, he comes out swinging. He gets some great shots on Kuramagomedov, but Kuramagomedov is able to survive. He's able to get to that bell. And those first 3 rounds make the difference there as he wins this fight. He wins 3 rounds. Musayev wins 2 rounds, although he loses the 1 point. So it's 48-46 for the new champion, Kuramagomedov. And as I just talked about, with some early retirements from Dagestan, we get another one here because after it, in the post-fight, right there in the ring, Kuramagomedov says, that's it. He's done. That's a tough break for the PFL. Now, of course, when you first hear that, you're like, why would you check with a guy and make sure he's going to hang around for a bit before you put him in the title fight? Well, because as I said, the guy's only 29 years old. He's 29 and hanging it up. unbeaten, but still says, you know what? Good enough career for me. I'm out. That creates a problem for the PFL now because you just created this belt, just made a title fight for it, and the guy who win it is out. So after a title fight, now you have a vacant belt to be put up for. And he just beat the guy that was the top contender for it in Musayev. So what do you do now? You look at the top four in that division. Number one without the belt is Musayev. He just lost that fight. Can you put him back in there in a title shot right away after just losing? Number two is Thaddeus, who was in attendance and made big name for himself winning that tournament last year. Sure, you put him in there, but who's his opponent? Number three is Magomed Umalatov. Umalatov just lost to Musayev in his last fight in 2024, hasn't fought since. Logan Sterling at number four. Well, he just lost to Thaddeus in the tournament last year for this division. I think the way you got to do it is Musayev versus Thaddeus, and then you put Umalatov and Sterling in a battle for who's up next. Not only does that work out well with the rankings, but I think because of the way Musayev finished this fight, you can still make that happen. Now, if this was Nurmagomedov just dominating all 5 rounds, then there's no way you throw Musayev in there and you figure out a different way with Umalatov or Sterling getting the shot. Or you make them fight first, and then whoever wins that gets the shot at Thaddeus. But since Musayev was able to come through strong in that second half of that fight and make it, a tight fight in the end, make it a situation where a few more punches could have gotten the finish and he still could be a champion, you can still give him that shot, I think, against Thaddeus. That's going to be a hell of a fight. You put those two strikers together, expect fireworks for the next time you fight for this title. Before that, the only other fight that we were watching really on this one, as far as betting it and really interested, was the featherweight battle between Jesus Pinedo and Samalat Isbulayev. Now, Pinedo, the 29-year-old from Peru, of course, the former PFL featherweight tournament winner, coming off a loss to Khabulayev in last year's tournament in the finals before he tested positive for banned substance, going against Isbulayev, the 29-year-old from Russia, who was, I think, 9-0 coming into this. We didn't know too much. Of course, had a big amateur experience, but we hadn't seen him in major promotions. So we didn't know what this fight was going to be like for him, how he was going to come out. Well, I picked Pinedo to win it at -104, and I thought he'd get the KO TKO plus 250. Neither of those come through because for the first 4 minutes of this fight, it didn't look like either of them won to fight. Isbulayev gets the win by first round TKO, 4 minutes and 57 seconds into the first round. So with 3 seconds left, it's stopped by Big John McCarthy. But the first 3 minutes were just these guys circling, throwing feints, I guess trying to find openings, but it didn't seem like either of them really wanted to engage, to the point that Big John McCarthy stops the fight there and says, guys, let's go, let's fight. How many times do you ever see a ref get in there like that in the first round of the fight, telling these guys they got to start mixing it up? That's how bad this was. And they still didn't do it for another minute. They're still dancing around, maybe throwing a little bit more, but nothing that was major ill intent, nothing that was really going to do damage. It wasn't until really 4 minutes and 10 seconds into the first round that Isbulayev really threw down, got a takedown against Pinedo, took him to the mat. Then, trying to move around, less than 20 seconds left, gets a position where he throws a crucifix over top of Pinedo, starts landing some big shots on him, and with only a few seconds left, Big John McCarthy stops the fight, steps in there, and it kind of looked weird, because only a couple seconds left. What are you doing? Give the guy a chance? Of course, you're not supposed to have that in your head as the ref. You're not supposed to be counting down, but you know that he's almost out of it. But he said that he tapped. Now, I don't think he got a full-on tap, but it looked like maybe he was waving it off. He was watching the face of Pinedo. He was watching those hands. They're waving all around. Maybe he saw something that he said to him or signaled to him to end the fight. Interesting for Pinedo to be in that situation where really does nothing, gets a couple big elbows landed on him, and with just 3 seconds left in the round, decides to call it quits. Not a great showing for him. And we'll see what is next, because I would have had him fighting for this title. If you were going to make a title fight in this division, I would have put him up there. The guy who won the tournament cheated. So he was the one who made it to the finals. He should be fighting for it. Now, after this fight, you can't put him in there. You can't give him a title fight, not just because he lost, but because he looked pathetic. He looked like he didn't want to fight. It looked like he was just in there for the paycheck, really. So after that, the next guy that you would obviously put in there is AJ McKee with his record, but he's got a fight coming up against Adam Borch. So either maybe you make Borch and McKee a title fight, or you make it a title eliminator and put the winner of that against the top-ranked guy in this division, and Timur Khizriev. But we're going to see if he's ready for that, too. It all depends on his health because in the middle of 2025, two guys tried to rob him and shot him a couple times, hit multiple times. And we haven't seen him since. So what's his health like? Is he ready to go? Is he ready for this title shot? If he is, give him one of those guys. Give him McKee and Borch, whoever wins by those rankings. If not, do you just make Borch and McKee a title fight and give it a little more prestige on that card coming up later this year? I don't know. We'll see what is next for this division in the PFL. But certainly any title fight does not include Jesus Pinedo after what we just saw out there in Dubai. Now, the UFC was not going to be left out last weekend. They were in the mix as well with a fight night card out there at the Meta Apex in Vegas. The third fight card in a row for them to start 2026. And it was headlined by a bantamweight fight between Mario Bautista and Vinicius Oliveira. Now, this was not the most exciting card. 9 of the 13 fights went to decision, so a lot of work for the judges throughout that fight card. The main event didn't, but that doesn't mean we're not left with some questions after that fight. Of course, Bautista, the 32-year-old, 10-2 in the UFC, coming in off that loss to Umar Nurmagomedov. But he had won 8 in a row before that, one of the top guys in this division, going in there against Oliveira, the 30-year-old from Brazil, 4-0 in the UFC. We like Bautista, minus 146. I picked him to win on the money line. I thought he'd win by points at plus 250 because both these guys had gone to a bunch of decisions in the last couple fights. But Bautista gets the win over Oliveira by second round rear naked choke, 4 minutes and 46 seconds into the round. Now, Oliveira came forward and was tagging early, trying to put Bautista against the cage. Instead of Bautista being the wrestler grappler, it seemed like Oliveira was going to try to make that his thing. But Bautista got out of that and landed some good strikes from the outside to take the first round. Second round, Oliveira's already looking tired. Bautista stalks him, eventually gets him to the ground, where he throws a late crucifix on him, starts pounding on him. Oliveira escapes it, but that leaves Bautista the chance to go for the Kimura. And after Oliveira fights that off, he transitions from that right to the back and gets a rear naked choke and a quick tap from Oliveira. Bautista says he wants to go back at someone in the top of that division. He wants his shot at the main guys. Once again, even calls out Corey Sandhagen for a rematch. That could be interesting. Maybe that fight can be made because Sandhagen was supposed to fight Zahabi. There was rumors about that, but Zahabi's going to need a little longer to recover from his injuries, apparently. So if you're going to give him someone in that top 5, I think Sandhagen makes a lot of sense for Bautista, and we'll see if he gets that. So no question for him as far as winning, no question in him standing in this division as one of the top guys. The questions do arise, though, about the performance of his opponent. Because Oliveira, as we said, started gassing out in that second round. Why? A guy coming in there for a 5-round fight should have a much better gas tank than that. Wasn't that much action in the first round? Well, because we found out that he's been injured the whole camp. He had a fracture in his arm 51 days before the fight, training with a cast, even had a rotator cuff and meniscus injury as well, and still fought. Now, for him, it makes sense in certain ways because if you don't fight, you don't get paid. And that's something we've talked about before on this show, that you got to find a way with this new money coming into the UFC, these big deals, that maybe these guys don't have to do this if they're not at full strength, because at 4-0, this could have been a big situation for him to get a win against a top-level guy and put his name in those rankings, make himself a contender. That's going to drop him off right now fighting after all those injuries. So money-wise, it makes sense. Standing-wise, it was a chance that he probably should have taken. And it really pisses off bettors like me because, yeah, I thought Bautista was going to win. If Oliveira was at full health, did I think it was going to be any different than if he was compromised? No. I still thought Bautista was going to win. But I'm certainly not expecting to go all 5 rounds to decision when I find out the guy can barely train for the last 2 months. I'm not expecting his gas tank to last for 5 rounds if the guy can't do anything because he broke his arm and has meniscus problem and the rotator cuff. Like, what the hell is going on here that none of this information is found out? Of course, he's going to hide it, but they do health checks before these fights. The commission and the UFC make sure these guys are at the ability to fight, that they're healthy enough to go through with this. How did none of this show up before this guy got in the cage and really laid an egg for 2 rounds? When you have stuff like this, it just makes it seem shady. I get why he did it as far as getting paid, but it screws up everybody else who's involved with this, and a lot of money's changing hands because this guy isn't letting us know that he's banged up coming into this and can barely train and has no gas tank and is basically fighting with one arm. I don't like it. It's shady. It's not a good look. And with the already betting scandals we've had in the last 6 months for the UFC, with guys fighting and getting questioned and released about, fighting and throwing fights or other guys getting pulled because there's some weird betting angles. To have after the fight, this guy come out and talk about how he could barely train because he's been injured for 2 months. It's just a bad look once again. It needs to get fixed. We need to find a system where these guys don't have to fight for whatever these purses are and can sit out a couple months and heal up and give us the fight that we expect instead of these guys going in there banged up and putting on a lackluster performance like that. Because not only is it not safe for him, it screws a lot of people with a lot of money they put on this fight. Speaking of title implications, you had that in a fight here at flyweight between Amir Albazi and Kyoji Horiguchi. Albazi, the 32-year-old, 7-1 in the UFC before this fight, coming off a decision loss to Moreno last November. But Horiguchi, the 35-year-old, 8-1 in his 2 stints in the UFC, coming off his 3rd round rear naked choke win in November to get himself back into the UFC. I like Horiguchi, minus 370. I thought he'd win by points at minus 120. He nails both of those as he gets a unanimous decision win, 30-27 on 2 judge scorecards, 29-28 on 1 judge's scorecard. First round, Albazi had a late shot that dropped Horiguchi for a second, but he gets right back up, quickly striking again. He had a good shot by Albazi, but I thought that Horiguchi still won that round. I thought he was still the more consistent fighter throughout that first round. Second round, Horiguchi landed a good combo midway through the round that looked like Albazi was in trouble. Looked like this fight could have been over then, but he does a good job getting out of the way, getting his win back, recovering. Still, Horiguchi landed some stiff strikes at the end of that round. I thought he was up 2-0 coming into that final round. Maybe it's 1-1, depending on how you scored it. But in the 3rd round, Horiguchi was coming forward aggressively, making sure to put a stamp on this as his fight. Albazi tried to tie him up against the cage, tried to take him down, but Horiguchi fought him off, kept the fight on the feet, and was landing some good shots with 2 minutes left that put Albazi in trouble again. Rinse and repeat throughout the rest of that round because, again, Albazi clinched, Horiguchi broke the clinch, landed big strikes. Albazi tried to clinch, Horiguchi got away, landed some good strikes. So clearly won the 3rd round. I gave him definitely the 2nd round and possibly the 1st round too. I had it 30-27 for Horiguchi, but he gets the win with 30-27 on 2 cards, 29-28 on 1. But again, showing that he is still one of the best in his division, even at 35 and in his 2nd stint in the UFC. Did the same thing as the first one. Called out the champ. He wants a title shot. Put on a nice little promo there after the fight. Now, of course, things are different after his first fight because after his first fight, his teammate Pantoja was the champion. Didn't matter. He's still willing to fight him. Now Joshua Van is the champ. So where do we go from there? Does Horiguchi get that title shot? I think that all depends on what the UFC wants to do with Pantoja. If they're giving him time to heal, to get a title shot in a rematch against Van, which I think they should do, then Horiguchi's probably sitting on the sidelines and have to fight somebody else. If they're saying, you know what, this guy's got some juice, let Pantoja heal and we'll bring him back when he's ready, put Horiguchi against Van, then I think he should get a shot there. There's some other guys that could be in that mix, of course, as well. Manel Kape, who has some good wins coming off the last couple fights of him and higher in the rankings, as well as Tyra. So there's definitely some competition for Horiguchi besides the former champion Pantoja. But, I mean, this guy, how can you not love what he has done in his return to the UFC? And again, when he left the UFC, he wasn't some schlub. He wasn't getting knocked around and losing. He only lost to probably the greatest ever in this division in Demetrius Johnson. Just decided to go test the waters elsewhere to get his name bigger and try to get bigger paydays because back in that day, this division was just thrown to the dogs. It was just on cards. They weren't getting the love. They weren't getting the money that they should have for the incredibly exciting fights that they had when Demetrius Johnson was fighting on that division and the champion and the king of it. So now he's back. Now this division is getting more love. Now people finally, give it the respect it deserves. Give this man a title shot. If not, maybe you put him against Tyra in that Japan card that they're allegedly trying to put together in April or May. 2 Japanese fighters against each other for a shot at the title. I think that would be awesome. Or you just put any one of them on that fight card. Maybe you put one of them against Kape for a title shot. Maybe you put one of them, against Van for the championship. You could have all 4 of those guys on that card with those 2 Japanese fighters in Japan, and it would rock the roof off that place. A lot of great options right now for the UFC in this division, but excited to see what's next for Horiguchi coming up after 2 great wins so far in his return to the organization. Now going from a exciting fight to a very, very boring one, as we've had so many times lately in the heavyweight division. Your number 6, Halton Almeida, going against Rizvan Kuniev. Almeida, the 34-year-old, was 9-2 in the UFC, but 2-2 in his last 4. Kuniev, the 33-year-old from Russia, 0-1 in the UFC. I liked Almeida, minus 162. I liked him by submission at plus 200. We don't get a chance at that because Almeida put on a terrible performance. Kuniev wins by unanimous decision, 30-27 on 2 judge scorecards, 29-28 on 1 judge scorecard. I mean, I'm not going to even waste your time breaking this fight down too much because it was a terrible fight. Almeida couldn't get the takedowns early, and that led to Kuniev just putting him in the clinch against the cage, throwing some shots here or there, but nothing that was ever really noteworthy or exciting or great. It was just dominating by Kuniev. Almeida couldn't get into the mat, and it looked like he didn't know what to do otherwise. So now, after that fight, you had Almeida's manager come out and say, you know what, he's going to drop down to 205. He's fought there before. Maybe heavyweight is a place for him, even though he was in the top 6 of that division coming in. But now he's going to drop down to 205. Well, he's going to fight that division somewhere else because the UFC released him. Later in the week, after the announcement he's going to drop down to 205, doesn't seem like the UFC is too interested in it after the performance he's put on lately. They release him. He's out of the organization. The top 10 guy getting cut. That's how bad the performance has been the last couple fights for Halton Almeida. All right, before we get out of here, just 2 more topics I'm going to touch on that were crossing the news wires this last week in combat sports, and that's one with the matchup that is happening and one a matchup that might happen. First off, with the one that is locked in, that is Michael Venom Page, not happy with what the UFC has given him as far as opponents go. He said he was looking to fight any of the top welterweights, called out a ton of them after his last win, but that none of them were willing to fight. So now he's fighting Patterson, a guy who's not even in the rankings of this division. Both guys from the UK fighting each other. Now, usually when they make cards like that, you go overseas, they put the guy from the area against someone from a different area so that you get the fans behind him. Now you got 2 guys from the same country fighting each other. In fact, MVP's talked about how he's trained with this guy before to get ready for other fights, but now they're going to be matching up because it seems like either no one wants to fight MVP or the UFC just doesn't want to give him those fights. And I understand his frustration. I mean, this guy did great things in Bellator, was a former champion there, and since he came to the UFC, has been 3-1. His only loss was to Ian Machado Gary, one of the top guys in this division. Guy who's probably going to get the next title shot, as long as what we're talking about in the next story doesn't come true. But instead of getting a top 10 opponent, he's fighting this guy who's not even in the rankings, a guy who's an afterthought for a lot of UFC fans. He's 38 years old. How much time does this guy have left in his career? Utilize it to the best you can. I mean, are they trying to just keep him there and use him, but also punish him? Is he getting the Armin Sarukian treatment? Because this is a guy who has great skills, has put on some great performances for you, and still not fighting a top 10 guy trying to get him up in those rankings and see what he can do. No, we're giving him some guy who's a lose-lose situation. If he wins, he was supposed to. Who is this guy? If he loses, well, who is this guy? So now he's a bum and he's out of the top 15. I don't get what the UFC is trying to do right now with MVP. Michael Venom Page should be in there against some of these top 15 guys in that division, seeing if he can work himself up, seeing if he is the fighter he thinks he is and that we've all seen from him throughout his career. And if that's the case, and he beats some of those guys, then give another guy a little higher and see if he can work his way up and get himself into a title shot before his career is over. But it seems more like what the UFC is willing to do is just run out the clock, waste the last days he has by just sticking him in there to get some fans in England, but not giving him a fight of any consequence that can make things get better for him and improve his standing in this division. Now, another fight people have talked about for a long time that hasn't come through that, well, we'll see, maybe it can, is a battle between Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria. Now, Topuria, of course, was the featherweight champ, moves up to try to fight Makhachev at lightweight. Makhachev moved up, took the welterweight title. Well, he says he's still game to fight Ilia Topuria, though, talking about that White House card being a great place for these two to match up against each other in this battle of some of the best in the UFC. This is going to be interesting to see if they make this happen, because I don't like the idea of this right now. I'm not saying never. Before, when Makhachev was the lightweight champion and Topuria was 145, I thought that would have been awesome. There's beef, there's talk, would have been great. Didn't happen. So now you can't make it and force it, because Topuria is coming off this layoff where he was out because of his personal issues, fighting for his family. I get that. No problem with him taking the time off, but now the guy hasn't fought in 8 months. You got a bunch of guys waiting for him in that division, but bunch of contenders, stamping their name on their card, their ticket to go fight for that title. I mean, you got Justin Gaethje, of course, is now the interim champion. You have Armin Sarukian sitting there as the #1 contender, but can't get a title fight. And you got some other guys starting to climb up those rankings as well, as Benoit Saint Denis, other guys who are making their name known as a title challenger in this division. You're going to put them further on ice and hold them out more and go fight him against Makhachev? And what is it for? Is it for Makhachev's belt at 170? Or is it for Toporia's belt at 155? Or is it catch weight for no belts? You've already had Topuria sit out for his issues. If he's not fighting and fighting against that interim belt, he should be fighting Sarukian. Otherwise, it makes no sense to have this guy fight for a different title or against a different person. Later on, if he goes and unifies against Gaethje, who is an American and would be a great fight at that White House card, or if he beats him and then goes and beats Sarukian or fights Sarukian and beats him, then maybe you can go have him fight in a epic super fight. But it doesn't make sense to hold him out further and hold his division up more by putting him against Makhachev. And what about Makhachev? He just won this title. He won the welterweight belt, hasn't defended it yet. So now do you hold that division up as well, where you have guys like Ian Machado Gary waiting for a title shot, or Carlos Prates, or Michael Morales? You have three guys there creating a logjam, stamping their claim as guys who are ready to fight for the title. Do you then put them on ice or make them fight in some round-robin situation in order to put Makhachev against Topuria? I think it works out well for the UFC to hold up both these divisions where you have some clear-cut title challengers and put them against each other. I think instead, you let them go fight another time or two, and then maybe next year, beginning of next year, middle of next year, depending on how things go, injuries, fights, things like that. In a year, let it build up some more and put these guys against each other, whether it's back down at lightweight or you let Topuria climb up to welterweight. But I don't think it makes sense right now to have both these guys, one who has just won the title and not defended it yet, and one who is coming off a long layoff and has an interim belt in his division, to have them hold those divisions up more in order to fight each other. You could have did it before. You didn't do it. You missed the opportunity then. Don't open this window now. Leave it for next year. Let them go and do their damage against other guys before you put them against each other. That's it for this episode of Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano. Whether you are watching or listening on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, send it to friends, get it out there for other people to enjoy and take part in with us. Follow me and the show on social media, of course, at Fighting Lines on X, at Fighting Line Pods, on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. We'll be putting content on that throughout the week before we come out with next week's episode. Come back next week. We will preview UFC Fight Night down there in Houston between Strickland and Hernandez in H-Town. We'll also preview Mario Barrios versus Ryan Garcia and Claressa Shields versus Franchon Cruz Zurin in boxing. And we'll break down the latest news and notes. And since we don't have a ton of cards for the first time in a while, maybe we'll get some guests on here as well to talk about things going on in combat sports. All that coming up on Fighting Lines with Brian Ciano next week. Thanks so much. Talk to you then.